I've always been a huge fan of visual novels, so when I played Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc for the first time, my mind was blown. I was never a huge fan of detective stories, but detective games? Well, let's just say 16-year-old me fell down a rabbit hole from which he would never return. For about half of that year, my brain was consumed by this series. I didn't engage with the fandom all that much though, because, well, honestly any fan base can be annoying. So, when I finally got to Danganronpa V3, the final entry in the franchise, I was untainted by fan consensus or any prior knowledge that I might have had when I picked up the first game. Which definitely made it one of the more impactful games I've played. I say impactful because 5 years later, I still have no clue what to make of its ending. Before I start though, there are some housekeeping things we need to go over. First off, I'm using the English localization for these games when I talk about them. That's going to piss a lot of Danganronpa fans off because there are some nuances that get lost in translation, but 1, I'm an English speaker, sorry, and 2, these are the games we got, whether we like it or not. If V3's localization was that bad, it could have been patched during any of the re-releases, but it wasn't. I'm taking this game at face value here. I'm not going to go dig through alternate versions because the wording might be slightly different. And that's assuming I can even find a faithful translation patch to begin with. It's not like I can read or speak Japanese fluently, so I have no way of knowing what's actually accurate anyway. I could take the time to turn this into a broader point about people policing other people's enjoyment of a product, but I've wasted enough time here, and I'm about to waste some more. Before I can jump in, you little freaks who subscribe to me for FNAF content gotta know that there's gonna be an insane amount of spoilers in this video. Given that Danganronpa is a mystery series, things will be way more impactful if you play the game spoiler-free. Seriously, if you like FNAF, you probably like mystery, so I'm willing to bet you'll enjoy these games a lot if I don't spoil it for you. I'm also going to be glossing over a lot of the series' big moments with a little explanation, so you may still end up losing a bit along the way. Seriously, this is your last chance. Go play those games. They're very good games. Alright, everyone gone? Great. Cool. If you're familiar with the series, here's a timestamp you can skip to, but for all of the psychos who want to watch me read wiki articles for the next 5 minutes, let's get started. Danganronpa tells the story of 16 students with extraordinary talents called Ultimates, forced to remain within the confines of their high school, Hope's Peak Academy. A murderous robot teddy bear named Monokuma tells them that in order to leave, they must kill a classmate, then make it through a class trial without being caught. However, at the end of the game, it's revealed that the students chose to sequester themselves within the school to escape the end of the world. One of their classmates, Junko Enoshima, decides to turn that hope for a better future into the brutal killing game the characters find themselves in. So a handful of the surviving students put a stop to the killing game and escape to the outside world while Junko commits a poetic suicide. Sounds really simple, right? Yeah, well, that's because, like the first FNAF game, Danganronpa was designed to be self-contained and only got more convoluted as the series went on. In the time between the first and second games, a light novel was published detailing the events before Danganronpa 1, foreshadowing plot points that would then be expanded upon in 2. But, if you're an American, you probably just jumped right into Danganronpa 2, which is where I'm starting. Like I said, I plan to skip over large swaths of the story in the beginning because, as you'll see when we get to V3, the details are largely irrelevant. So, with that out of the way, we'll move on to the second game. Whoa! Turns out Junko had a squad of baddies ready to pick up her pieces. After all, a boss bitch can't take over the world on her own, can she? Calling themselves the Remnants of Despair, or World Ender, these guys are none other than the class preceding the class of Danganronpa 1, and they sure put the bad in baddie. After dismembering and using the remains of Junko Enoshima, they are captured by the Future Foundation, a group focused on undoing the damage done by Junko and her cultist followers. It just so happens that they were captured by the Future Foundation's newest members, the survivors of Danganronpa 1. Pushing for rehabilitation rather than execution, Mikoto and the others decide to put the Remnants of Despair into a simulation, reverting them back to before they met Junko. However, the leaders of these remnants happens to be an extra special student whose talent is the concept of talent itself, Izuru Kamakura. He's good at everything, but that led to a very boring life for him, so, knowing what's about to happen, he uploads an AI recreation of Junko into the simulation in an attempt to even the playing field. In the end, another killing game is started, this time in the simulation. It goes off without a hitch. Kind of. Izuru is reverted to his state before the tragedy, before a secret experiment done by Hope's Peak would alter his brain to give him talent. He doesn't even have any sort of talent anymore. He becomes a normal high school student, Hajime Hinata. Thankfully, the virus operates independently of him once it's in the system, quickly taking control of the simulation and starting a killing game with the students powerless to stop it. The killing game is off to a bloody start, but as the time wears on, the survivors in the simulation are inspired by the survivors of the previous game to put all the killing to an end and overcome the simulation. Now, after Danganronpa 2 came out, we got two pieces of side media meant to conclude the story. The first being Danganronpa Ultra Despair Girls, and the next being Danganronpa 3, The End of Hope's Peak Academy. Ultra Despair Girls is really side media that expands on a shit ton of details from the main game. I plan to gloss over the bulk of the story, but just know that there's a super advanced, isolated city that used to serve as the last bastion for humanity before it was attacked by a swarm of Monokumas. Much like Ultra Despair Girls, Danganronpa 3 is also side content. Well, kind of. I know a lot of people just got mad at me, but hear me out. For those not in the know, Danganronpa 3 is an anime series split into two different arcs, one occurring at the same time as the Danganronpa 0 side manga entitled Despair Arc, and the other one occurring directly following the events of Danganronpa 2, entitled Future Arc. You're supposed to watch them back and forth, progressively gaining more context for each one, but all you really need to know is that by the end of Future Arc, humanity is well on its way to rebuilding itself. But, the event trade don't really add anything to Danganronpa V3, and, well, that's because Danganronpa V3 largely stands on its own, for the most part at least. What I mean is that though Danganronpa V3 is the third mainline game in the Danganronpa series, it's not actually canon to the other two games, at least if you believe what the game tells you. According to the mastermind of V3's killing game, Tsumugi Shirogane, the ultimate cosplayer, the entirety of V3 is actually just an elaborate performance being televised as the 53rd season of the popular franchise Danganronpa. See, the thing is, in order to create a more believable performance, Tsumugi asserts that Team Danganronpa chose contestants and rewrote their memories with those of the characters they're here to play, like a reality TV show. They achieve this fucked up memory play with these nifty devices called flashback lights, which cannot recover memories but instead implant new ones. At the end of the game, this is used as evidence to suggest that the survivors are in fact fictional characters. But this alone doesn't prove that the past installments are fiction, does it? All it really proves is that the memories that were implanted were artificial. On top of that, none of these supposed false memories actually pertain to past games. Rather, they contain new content that would be placed before V3 but after 2. Thankfully though, this game has more evidence for us. You see, in the very first chapter of the game, we learn that Tsumugi has an affliction called cospox, where she breaks into a rash if she cosplays as a real person. During the final trial, however, she begins to cosplay as the characters from past games, insisting that because she's able to do so, the characters from those past games must be fictional. But what if cospox is a lie? When Tsumugi first tries convincing everyone that their memories are fiction, she reveals that not only are the memories in the flashback lights fiction, but that their very selves have become fiction. And I think this is where the cracks start to show. If the characters we play as are referred to as fiction, why can't she cosplay as them? You could say that it's because V3 is a reality show. Their likenesses are still real, and therefore Tsumugi can't cosplay as them. But does that mean that Tsumugi can't cosplay as any characters from live-action media? That seems like a pretty odd distinction to make, especially without telling the player outright. So what other reason could she have to consider the cast of V3 real and the cast of other games fake? Well, one could make the argument that because she's seen the flashback lights, she inhabits the fictional world of V3, but not the world of previous entries. But even if this was the case, she uses the term fiction to describe the characters she's speaking to, but she never applies it to herself. If nothing else, it seems like she personally considers them to be fiction, which I think should be the baseline for whether or not she breaks into cospox. Not some weird, poorly defined metaphysics as to what counts as real. The only conclusion we can come to is that Tsumugi is either lying about cospox or she's lying about V3's characters being fiction. I've gone back and forth on this for a while, rewriting the script multiple times, but I think she's lying about both, and I'll go into why. When we see the contestants' audition tapes, they all happen to be in the exact same angle, semi-top down. The character and the floor are all we see in these shots, with the edges of the frame draped in shadows. And strangely enough, this shot seems to be exactly the same in every tape we see. Now, why is that weird? Well, beyond the fact that it would be weird for audition tapes for different people to look so similar, there's actually one place in this game where we see the exact same wooden flooring in this exact same shade. Tsumugi's cosplay lab. But that's not all. At the very start of the prologue, Kaede and Shuichi both recall being kidnapped. Why kidnap them if they're willing participants? Their memories were erased anyway, so it's not like they'd remember it later. Kaede even introduces herself as Kaede Akamatsu in the prologue, which contrasts directly with the audition tape we see for Shuichi, who has his real name censored. While we're on the topic of the prologue, actually, let me get a little more in depth here, because a lot of people have told me that it's obvious the characters know what's happening if you go back through the prologue, and yeah, sorry, I'm just not buying it. The only person who seems to have even remotely a clue of what's going on here is Rantaro, being aware of the exact number of students necessary for the game to begin. In fact, the other characters seem off-put and confused by his knowledge, so if they knew about Danganronpa beforehand, their behavior here is incredibly strange. On top of that, even though this scene is apparently before the flashback lights gave them their fictional personalities, the characters still have their exact same personalities from the Killing Game here. The only thing that sticks out as weird to me here is that Kaede seems interested in the Monocubs, seeming to recognize the name, but later in that exact same scene, she seems gloomy when she tells the Monocubs that she doesn't have a talent, something that only makes sense in the context of the Ultimate Hunt, and almost immediately after that, Monosuke says that it's because they've forgotten their talents and become normal high school students. Why would this be their explanation if they volunteered for this Killing Game? They were already normal high school students. Monotaro even refers to gaining their talents as them remembering their true selves. Granted, immediately after this, they're shown a flashback light, but I don't think those are necessarily lies. Yes, the memories were implanted, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not true. In fact, at the start of chapters 2, 3, and 4, we get special scenes outside of any of the characters' perspectives, taking an omniscient POV, and they seem to corroborate the narrative of the flashback lights. So what scenes am I referring to here, and why do they matter? The first is a scene mourning Kaede's death, where an unknown speaker says that they were running away from that group. Two very important things to note about this scene. One, not just Kaede's, but apparently everyone's death here is ruled as an accident despite the speakers not believing it was. And two, the speakers are afraid of this group. So afraid that they don't even want to speak loudly for fear that they'll be heard by members of it. Beyond that, I want to talk about the way Kaede is presented here, because that's very important if she's supposed to be fictional. We see that she's in her ultimate pianist outfit, which would be weird for her funeral, considering the ultimate pianist stuff was just for the show. But when does this funeral take place? After Kaede died, right? For one, it's a funeral, but she's also wearing her ultimate pianist outfit, which, if Tsumugi is to be believed, she could only have gotten at the start of the Killing Game. There is the possibility that these scenes are fake, parts of the story laid out for this season, but then what does that mean about the other scenes we've seen from an omniscient point of view? The ones that vaguely support Tsumugi's narrative? It would be infinitely less convoluted if we could just take all of these omniscient POVs as real events that are happening within the game's narrative. There's also a possibility that these are fan funerals, tributes uploaded online by fans of the series. But even if I were to buy into the game's narrative that Danganronpa is a worldwide phenomenon that everyone's obsessed with, which I actually kind of do, I find it hard to believe that we're looking at a fan's funeral for the game's characters. Let's take a look at that CG again. Count the picture frames, 8 on top, 8 on bottom, 16 total. While we don't get to see each individual photo, 16 is the exact number of students in V3. Even if you were to say that the other frames are empty, that wouldn't make sense because 1, the Killing Game goes until there are 2 people are left, which means there should be 14 frames, not 16, and 2, Rantaro already died at this point, so where's his photo? They definitely couldn't have been made after the Killing Game took place because the outside world would know that not everyone in the game died. And though the scene's direction heavily implies that the speakers are talking about Kaede, the speakers use plural language, saying they shouldn't have died, they were so talented. I doubt the writers would make Kaede a non-binary character outside the Killing Game, but a cis girl in it given how they handled Chihiro, so I can only assume that the speakers are talking about the entire cast of V3 being dead, which implies their deaths were all faked outside of the Killing Game. The second cutscene is honestly much more disappointing in the wake of how juicy the first is, but it does confirm that there was a honestly pretty tame meteor shower. I don't know what to make of this one, because on the one hand, it heavily implies that the world has been ended by meteor showers like the flashback lights suggest, but on the other hand, the CG just isn't that impressive. The sky is still kind of blue, and these meteors don't look particularly dangerous or large. So moving on to the third one, we see a snippet of Rantaro's Survivor perk video here. This one's really short and doesn't tell us much either. Yeah, honestly, that's about it. I was hoping this section would have a bit more meat to it, but it looks like only the first cutscene had a lot of info for us. Another issue here is the reality show aspect itself. If V3 is supposed to be a reality show, where are the staff? No, I'm not speaking in the sense of who's on set, so to speak. We already know that Kibo functions as the camera, and the game practically runs itself with the Mother Kuma facilitating everything, but that's kind of like letting ChatGPT host the next season of Big Brother. In fact, lots of modern reality shows have non-human hosts, like Too Hot to Handle, but the difference is that they all have people running things behind the scenes. Why does this matter? Well, what I'm getting at here is that V3 as a killing game is incredibly poorly run. At the beginning of the game, the Mono Cubs mess up the intro and have to restart. In Chapter 2, the Mono Cubs give out the wrong motives to everyone. In Chapter 3, Mono Kuma just goes catatonic for a vacation? In pretty much every chapter, something goes wrong with regards to how the killing game is being managed. Say nothing of Chapter 5, where Kokichi almost completely succeeds in destroying it, or Chapter 6, where we learn that the whole game is built upon a lie, and Tsumugi just kinda had to frame someone for the first murder. A first in Danganronpa, just to get the ball rolling. This could just be because Tsumugi is the sole person on site managing the killing game, but wouldn't it make more sense to have a crew controlling everything remotely from afar? I mean, for one, technology has definitely progressed to that level. Kibo and the Exosouls are proof of that. And Tsumugi herself claims that there are multiple people working on this Team Danganronpa, but just like, even from a business perspective, it makes no sense for Tsumugi to be the only one running things here. V3 is the 53rd entry in the apparently long-running killing game series. It's a worldwide phenomena. The idea that any corporation would leave the success of such a massive financial investment in the hands of a 15-year-old girl is absolutely fucking laughable. I don't care how talented of a cosplayer she is, we're being told that the outside world isn't Danganronpa's world, but rather one akin to our own. The only conclusion that I can come to is that Tsumugi is lying about the outside world too. The last thing I want to talk about is the audience chat that displays on screen for the majority of Chapter 6's trial. A lot of people seem to be under the impression that this is the smoking gun that proves that this is being broadcast as some sort of live stream reality show. But, like, I spent 5 minutes on ChatGPT and I got a semi-convincing chat log after, 4 prompts. I think the fact that a lot of comments repeat themselves leads credence to this. I don't know, it just feels weird that people accept these comments without any question. I was really hoping that by the time I got to dissecting this, I'd have more of an answer for what happens in V3, but I'm hesitant to share what I think happened. On the one hand, Tsumugi is clearly lying about lots of things, and you can kind of use facts the game presents you with to construct a meaningful narrative, but on the other hand, it just feels like I'm doing trig proofs here. If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. It's a lot of connecting disparate ideas that I know Kodaka wasn't thinking about. But honestly, I think that's kind of the point of the game's ending. It's open-ended. Tsumugi's lies were so big, so broadly spanning, that it's impossible to truly know what the circumstances were of the outside world. Shuichi even says as much in the epilogue. But at the risk of having a disappointing ending, I'll lay it all out piece by piece. So, if you have your own personal headcanon and don't want me to ruin it, go ahead and mute the video. Don't close it, though. If you do that, I'm gonna lose watch time. Speaking of boring stuff like YouTuber metrics, did you know that only 0.3% of people who watched my biggest video actually subscribed? That makes me angry, and you wouldn't like me when I'm angry. So go on, press that subscribe button. Make the number go up. Do it! Do it! Let's try to imagine for a minute a post-tragedy world and the people that might live in it. After all, the despair and chaos born from the collapse of society doesn't just disappear overnight. Enter Tsumugi Shirogane, an ultimate cosplayer in a post-tragedy world. Humanity was finally recovering from all the damage that had been done at the hands of Junko Enoshima. But Tsumugi was enamored with the killing games. Such a raw and pure form of entertainment. So visceral. So real. I'm willing to bet she wasn't alone in these feelings. There were likely many people still afflicted with despair, even after the war stopped and their cities rebuilt. The remnants of despair formed Team Danganronpa, and they would create the perfect killing game. So they reclaimed the destroyed Hope's Peak Academy overseas campus, the one still under construction, and as for how they were able to claim the school from the Future Foundation in a post-tragedy world, well, I'm willing to just chalk this up to the remnants of Despair's manpower. We learn in Danganronpa 3 that the Future Foundation isn't exactly large enough to set things back to the status quo on their own, so it's feasible that a small portion of territory could be claimed from them, especially if their resources are elsewhere rebuilding the world and combating Despair and all. We know that Team Danganronpa kept that building for a while too, because they held a minimum of 2 killing games there. There had to have been at least 1 killing game they had before V3 because of Rantaro's Survivor perk. The Survivor perk could have been recorded by Tsumugi like the audition tapes, but given Rantaro's understanding of the killing game before they received the first flashback light, combined with the lack of the usual wood flooring and camera angle, I think he actually made that video himself, and we can take what's said in it at face value. But why did I assert that I think there are specifically 2 killing games before V3? Well, I'm willing to bet that the V3 in the title is still important, though I don't think it means 53. No, I think that was just a bad pivot by Tsumugi to demoralize the survivors. Rather, I think it stands for Danganronpa version 3. That's right, I think similarly to what we see in the Danganronpa 3 anime and Danganronpa 0, there was a prototype killing game, one to check the parameters. That's why things are so uncoordinated. They're still barely on their 3rd attempt, and they're still learning how to run a game properly. Team Danganronpa is made of people who see themselves as tortured young artists, still learning the ins and outs of the trade, hindered in their attempts by their irrational desire to suffer the very despair that they inflict on others. Their egos drove them to fill the flashback lights with half-truths, fanfiction about a world in which they've won and destroyed all. When the cat's finally out of the bag, Tsumugi oversells the popularity of their twisted program as a last resort to plunge the survivors into despair. She tells them that not only is it being broadcast, everybody loves it. Not only does everybody love it, they don't even see the survivors as real people. I'm willing to bet she does this every time. That's what the fake audition tapes are for. As for the expanded prologue we see briefly in Chapter 6, that could just easily be edited video. After all, it doesn't seem to meaningfully connect to our prologue in any way. Even the dialogue feels tacked on here. The tone shift in the way the characters talk is bewildering. Their personalities in this one flashback contradict the entirety of the prologue up to this point. So, having successfully set the stage for their illusion, Team Danganronpa fills the room with what few comments they are getting on this stream. Not that it's a negligible amount, enough so that the survivors don't notice the messages repeat themselves. It's possible that Kibo's entire existence is to further sell this illusion, giving the impression that Team Danganronpa has more resources than they actually do. And yeah, I think that sums it up. Shuichi and company rise above Tsumugi's lies and decide to see the world with their own 2 eyes. Satisfied with running 3 whole killing games, Tsumugi decides to end the game the same way Junko would, like a true cosplay cat killer. And that's all I had to talk about for today. Thanks so much for watching. After the FNAF video got so much attention, I really just needed a break to switch things up. If you haven't seen my other videos and you like the Spooky Bear game, definitely go check those out. Apparently that's how YouTube knows my channel is quality and I'm not a one-hit wonder. And if you like my style and aren't really knowledgeable on FNAF, then may I direct you to my Theory-spective playlist? It should be relatively beginner-friendly, and it'll give you a firm grasp on the lore as the games came out. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and stay golden, everyone.